Hello and welcome to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. This is the very first episode of the podcast, and if you're listening to it, it probably means that you know me personally, heeded my incessant recommendations, and were incredibly charitable. Or alternatively, the various algorithms and the mysterious ways in which they work have been kind to the both of us. But there is a third reason you could be listening to this, and it's possibly because you're a fan of Sunship Balloon. That's who I'm chatting to on this debut episode, and if you're not across the name, there's a chance you might know the folks who make up that duo. Comprising Dan Haggis and Tord Knudsen, the pair have been creating music as two-thirds of English outfit the Wombats for over 2 decades now. In 2007, the Wombats released their debut album, A Guide to Love, Loss and Desperation, and swiftly began a career as a hard-working group that continuously pump out brilliant songs and equally impressive albums. I'm talking songs like Let's Dance to Joy Division, Jump Into the Fog, Lemon to a Knife Fight, and If You Ever Leave, I'm Coming With You, which combined would make up 4 pretty good additions to any greatest hits package. For Australian music fans, they're a mainstay of local stages, with 15 tours of the country in the last 16 years, and close to 100 performances throughout Australia as a result of those tours. In 2018, the Wombats vocalist Matt Murphy, better known as Murph, kicked off a solo career as Love, Fame, Tragedy, and in 2019, Dan and Tord decided to pool their creative resources to launch their own project, Sunship Balloon. Releasing debut album Everywhen in 2020 amidst a global pandemic, I had a chat to Dan for Rolling Stone Australia at the time and got a wonderful insight into some great musicians making wonderful music. Fast forward a couple of years, and after the Wombats released their highest charting album to date in early 2022, Sunship Balloon are back with another record. Titled Real Humans, it's another great example of why they're such impressive musicians. For this first episode of Trusty Chords, I was lucky enough to have a lengthy chat with Dan and Tord. Unfortunately, we did have a few first episode issues, and near the end, we actually lost Tord, though I'm assuming he's still located safely in Norway, so only Dan joined in for the Trusty Chords segment of the podcast. Regardless, enjoy the chat with Dan and Tord, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. All right, well, Dan Haggis and Tord Knudsen, thank you very much for joining the first episode of Trusty Chords. So, for those who don't recognize your names, can you give me a quick wrap-up of who you are and when, I guess, why you're here as well?
Shall I go first?
You can go first, yeah.
Okay, so I'm Dan. Myself and Tord met when we started the band called the Wombats, and we've been making music together for 21 years or so, and we can officially drink in America. Yay. We just, over the years had more and more musical ideas that were clogging up hard drives and notes on the phones, etc., and ended up wanting another outlet for a lot of music that we were making, and then that's sort of how Sunship Balloon started. And then very quickly it became not just a let's use stuff that's on our hard drive that we haven't been able to do anything with, but actually like, oh, we know what this project is, let's actually actively just work on it as a completely separate thing and, write songs just for that. And so, it's been a really fun outlet, and we've got to explore lots of new, sounds and songwriting styles and all sorts. So it's been awesome.
Yeah, I think that Dan's pretty much covering that pretty well. I think obviously obviously been making music together for a long time. I play bass in the Wombats, and as Dan's saying, it's like this little playground, little like like free and fun kind of spot where we can, like experiment a lot more maybe than what we can in the Wombats, and that's kind of been the main sort of engine for the project. And learning how to mix, for example, that was another thing that we've been working on, and actually do everything ourselves from the the start of making a song to actually finalizing it and eventually release it. So yeah.
Well, amazing. So I'll obviously touch on to the Sunship Balloon stuff in a sec, but I guess I guess there's probably a good chance that you're both very well known amongst Australian music fans. So that's something that I feel like a lot of obviously this is a podcast going out to Australian music fans. They'll probably know the Wombats, but they probably don't sort of know you guys. I guess earlier than that, which is something I'd love to sort of touch on, to looking at those early days. And I'm not talking about the whole hand on the knee, tell me about your parents sort of early days, because the very premise of this podcast is to discuss like a love of music. So I'd be remiss not to open with that. So do you folks have any particular early memories of when music first really resonated with you?
Yeah, I feel like probably one of the main ones for me was the first ever gig I went to, and it must have been like maybe 8 or something. And we went to the Philharmonic Hall in Liverpool, and there was an Irish folk artist called Mary Black who was performing, and a band called the Rankin Family supporting. And I remember like Mum had always had their music on in the kitchen and stuff. And finally, like seeing a band live, that sense of like communion when everyone's in the room together singing along. We ended up dancing on our chairs and like dancing up and down in the aisles, and like the sense that just the joy of the occasion was so kind of. I don't know. It just as soon as I left, I just felt I want to do that again. Which obviously you have with lots of things, like you go to the cinema or whatever you do, you get that feeling as a kid. But this was like something I remember feeling like, oh, I just want to be a part. Like I want to do this more. And I was then in an orchestra, and then the rest kind of follows on from there. But I feel like that was one of the first like live music experiences that just like I was completely spellbound.
And Tord, what about yourself?
I kind of I grew up in a family that was my dad was a music professor, so straight away it was kind of like the house was just full of music. He was playing piano, and kind of he was also doing lots of musical theatre. So there's a lot of that angle. I kind of got to enjoy music through being in a musical theatre, and also playing cello from the age of I was 6 years old, I think, when I started playing cello. So that kind of like was it was through classical music and musicals that I kind of like, like started to enjoy it, like, you know, watching and performing music. But obviously, like, as you grow a bit older and start school, and kind of like, that's when I kind of started to find all these bands. I think like a defining moment was when it was kind of two at the same time, but it was Green Day Dookie and The Offspring Smash that kind of came out. I feel like it was around the same time. Maybe it wasn't, but I found them around the same time, and that
Pretty
was
sure
just
they did come out around the same time. Yeah.
yeah.
Around
And
93, I think, probably, was it?
yeah, it's early 90s, and that kind of like that raw energy, but also like the kind of catchiness, and it was kind of pop songs, but it was kind of covered in this like edgy kind of fuzz guitars, and it was fast and it was raw, but it's kind of simple at the same time, and that really got me to sort of like, oh yeah, maybe I can learn to play bass guitar or guitar or whatever, and that kind of triggered that interest, and also to start writing some songs. So I picked up a guitar, and yeah, that was kind of like the beginning of it all. Wanting to be in a band, and when I was 12, I started a band, and that was kind of like, then I never looked back really.
Yeah, right. So obviously, for yourself, you had bands like Green Day and The Offspring. But Dan, what about yourself? Did you have any particular bands in those formative years that really, inspired you? I mean, I guess we'll touch on that a bit later. I guess with this other little
Yeah.
segment. But yeah, were there any that sort of really resonated with you?
Yeah, so similar to I played the flute and the piano from about the age of 7, and I was in a little orchestra playing the flute, and then similar, like when I was sort of, must have been 12, 13, I first heard Smells Like Teen Spirit and saw the video on MTV, and seeing Dave Grohl playing the drums was one of those like what is that? Because up until then, the drums I'd seen had been very much more just in the background, like still fascinated by it. And I did always like love watching the drummer and stuff, but like obviously Dave Grohl's style of playing and his hair and everything and the energy, that was just like, oh my God, that's what I want to do. And so started pestering my parents for a drum kit, and they were like, "What about the flute?" And I was like, "Nah, forget the flute. I
Snapped it
want to
over
play
your
the
knee and
drums."
threw it in the bin.
They really tried to get away with it, didn't they?
Yeah, yeah. I think the decibels of the drum kit was putting them off for a while, but no. Eventually, yeah. When I was 14, they got me a drum kit, and again, same as Tord, the rest is history. Kind of had wanted to start a band for ages, and we did. And in Liverpool right now, it's doing what it does best, and it's raining a lot. So being in a band with your friends was like a way to hang out and do something positive, constructive. Great way to hang out, but also get better on your instruments and learn how to play songs by people that know how to do it better than you do at that age. And so yeah, it was just such a fun time. And again, holding on to that kind of, I think that's what set me up the most for music, was how much fun it always felt. And just rehearsing or learning a song or writing music, whatever it was, like hanging out with your mates doing that. Obviously there's frustrating, like bang your head on a table moments, but it's just
Not
that,
to forget.
not to forget lots of those moments. But you get those moments in life in general, and it's just such a fun, creative way to hang out with your mates, really.
Yeah. So now, if my knowledge is correct, and it is strongly based on internet searchings over the years, so please forgive any inaccuracies. So, from what I can tell, you both attended the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts in the early 2000s. That's correct. So, I believe, Dan, were you studying Diploma of Popular Music and Sound Technology or something? And
Yes,
Tord was
correct.
studying music, was it?
Yes.
Yes.
It was not at the same time actually, because Dan was doing that the year before I moved over from Norway to
Yeah,
Liverpool.
because I was going to say I think there was a bit of discrepancy in time, but I guess the question I did have there is like, had you both? I mean, obviously those are both music related disciplines, so I guess you both were sort of wanting to do something with music in a larger capacity in your adult years, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. Like when you get to the end of school and everyone's applying to uni and working out what they're going to do next. Some people are kind of, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, and people know what they're going to do. Obviously, loads of people don't. I was a bit more in the kind of, well, all I've ever wanted to do and what I love the most is music, and languages second, but music's the main one. That's. But then at the same time, there's no guidebook, or you don't have classes in school saying like, and here's how you become a successful band or musician or whatever. So it's a bit of an unknown, when you're 17, 18. And obviously, there's loads of great bands out there who don't end up actually managing to make a career out of it. And so all the teachers were kind of like, well, most of the teachers were a bit discouraging, really, for like pursuing that as an actual profession. They were like, "Oh, that's a good hobby, but what about chemistry and law and languages? You're good at these things as well." And I was like, "Yeah, but I don't, I don't want to do that." Anyway, and I got into well, actually, this is a bit of a, it's not even, no, it's not a tangent. This is how I got into Lipper. So this is a sliding doors moment that kind of always really, surprises me, that I don't really believe in the universe kind of giving you clues and hints and stuff, but this was like pretty mad. So there's a guy who lives down the road, and randomly, like my mum had spoken to him that I liked music or something, and they weren't like close families, but he just saw this prospectus for Lipper, and he dropped it through our front door. And one day, I didn't know, I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'll just apply to another uni or go and do a ski season or something. And Mum was like, "Oh, what's in the letterbox?" And I started looking through it, and it was like, needs music A level, which I didn't have. Needs music A level, needs music A level. And then I got to this one that was the diploma in sound tech and music, and it was like, no A level required. Just send in like a demo tape. And I had a 4-track recorder in my room, so I literally ran upstairs and started like recording a 4-track, like versions of some of the songs that I'd made. Got my flute out on a couple to show that I could still play the flute, and and sent it in, and yeah, got in. And if that guy hadn't dropped that through the letterbox, I wouldn't have met Murph, and then wouldn't have met Tord. So it feels like yeah, it was meant to be.
Yeah. And Tord, I guess you were probably the same way, having studying music. You probably were actually wanting music to be part of your life.
Yes, very much so. I wasn't like, for me, it was never like any doubt about what I wanted to do, but obviously it sounds familiar what Dan's saying there about like people around you, kind of like, or like the sort of, society, I guess, like kind of like, oh yeah, like do something a bit more safe or whatever. But I was constantly in bands since I was like 12, basically, and was spending so much time on doing that exactly. I wasn't really enjoying anything else to that degree. I was just that, every time I came back from school, it was like down into the basement, start making on songs and trying to like record everything onto this 4-track recorder that my dad had. And programming on this black and white Atari, in black and white screen Atari, and it was super old school, working in MIDI, and but it was like constantly like trying to do all that. So yeah, that it was kind of like, that's kind of what I wanted to. I guess I didn't really have the confidence to think that I was maybe good enough to do that, but I did apply to LIPA with this kind of like, yeah, I don't, I was in a band at the time, I don't really need to go there, but I'll give it a try, because I was in this kind of like gap year school thing called Folk High School, and they had a sort of collaboration with LIPA, so they came to the school anyway. I didn't have to travel anywhere. I didn't have to go to England, or like I could literally do it where I was studying at the time. So, and then I got in, and that's when I decided to move over to England and leave all the bands that I was in. It was a pretty tough decision, because it was kind of like they were good friends, and it was things were kind of happening with the bands, and one of the bands were about to release an album, just got signed, but it was like in Norway, and I was like, I I don't know, I just had this feeling that I just needed to take this chance and move to Liverpool.
Well,
So
obviously
yeah.
that chance did pay off, because you ended up meeting a couple of guys who you started a band with, and you've been around the world. So, I mean, how did you all sort of coalesce into what became the Wombats? Like, how did that sort of happen? Because I think, unless I've already forgotten how you said it, Dan, you had met Murph there, and then obviously told you at like different years and everything. So how did you all get together?
Yeah, so me and Murph had we studied on the same year, and then towards the end of that year we started hanging out more and going out partying, and then started making songs together, and then playing at like open mic acoustic things in Liverpool, just playing either each other's songs, or I'd play we'd just play 2 acoustics, and it was an excuse to have a night out, really. And then we got on really well, and it felt fun, and so we sort of said, we should probably start a band. And then Murph was going on to do the full music course, and then Tord arrived, and he was like, I'll see if I find a drummer or a bass player, or a guitarist or whatever. And then, because I said I could play a bit of bass or guitar or drums, and then he said, I found a bass player, and I was like, perfect, I'll play drums. That was it, really, and we just started playing together, and here we are.
I guess you were sort of touching on it there, as a bit of an excuse just for a bit of a night out. But, was that sort of as far as, I guess, the vision went? Because some bands, they get together wanting fame and fortune. Others want an excuse to get free drinks at the bar. So is that what you guys were wanting? Or had you actually expected any big successes to come your way?
Before Tord had moved over, genuinely, the actual aim for us doing some music together was we'd made a song about a goat, and then immediately after making this song, we were walking down Bold Street in Liverpool and walked past this art gallery, and there was a painting of a goat that looked just like the one that we'd just made a song about. and with a hangover, we were sort of like, we should let's make some music and try and make enough money to be able to buy this painting. So that was kind of the main focus, to be honest, to begin with for me and Murph. And then obviously that sort of faded away once we I did think about buying it again years later, actually, but
well, that was going to be my next question. I was going to say, did you actually ever end up buying that painting, or
no, because then it sold not long after, and
You weren't quick enough.
Yeah, we weren't quick enough
to make money.
I know it took us about 3 or 4 years before we made any money from the Wombats. So yeah, it was gone by then. But yeah, it was. I mean, you sort of. We all wanted to make a career out of music. We didn't know how or what that meant exactly, and it wasn't the be all and end all, because ultimately making songs and playing gigs, that's what we all do, regardless of whether we make any money from it. But there was obviously this kind of let's just keep going and going, and hopefully people will end up liking our music as much as we do.
It was this I would say that there was this inner drive between the three of us. I think that because I obviously moved over from Norway, and I was obviously putting my eggs in many baskets, to say it in a way. I was in loads of bands, and I was like, oh yeah, trying this, and people asked, can you play bass or play guitar in this project? I was like, yeah. I was saying yes to everything, and you kind of but there was this kind of inner drive, I think, that and progression that the Wombats had, that none of the other projects I was working on had. I think there was this there was some, yeah, I don't know. I also got a really soft spot for three pieces, historically, in terms of music that I like, and being a three piece. I don't know. Maybe it's easier to handle than a band that you're in a band with 5 people. It's I don't know. It was just something there that was that just didn't happen in any of the other projects, and obviously there was constant progression as well, and both in the songwriting and in the gigs, we got better and better, and it was this kind of everything kind of felt like it was going somewhere.
Well, I mean, that's something I was going to say as well, in terms of actually going somewhere, because I mean, when you look at the actual general progression of everything, it's only 4 years before you guys really had a single that sort of started going around the world. I mean, I remember hearing, like most people, Let's Dance to Joy Division, which was a huge hit on things like Triple J here in Australia. So, and I'll gladly admit I had a downloaded low quality MP3 of that one for the longest time until I actually bought the album. So that's why I feel a bit, I feel safe admitting that, because I did buy the album. But, I think at the time I'd also been burned by bands sort of burning out so quickly that I was very apprehensive to hope for a long-term existence for you guys, because so many bands in that era would sort of have a single, then they just sort of disappear. I mean, I'm assuming you guys probably weren't expecting, 17 years down the line to still actually be sort of playing in a band. I mean, as you said before, it's 21 years since the band started, but it just...
I think obviously the hope for that happening was there. I feel like for so many bands, there's, all it takes is for one member of a band to not enjoy touring, or to have kids, or, there's so many life events that can happen that can just derail a band, because it's quite a mad life and mad existence, being away a lot, and also to keep having that drive to make music together with the same people, and feel like you're still growing and exploring, and coming up with new music that feels exciting, which fortunately I think all three of us have this kind of shared love for bands like Radiohead, where every album they've done, they've evolved and changed and, tweaked things, and just, regardless of what they were known for, they've gone off and done something else. And I'm not saying we're as, necessarily changed as much as them, obviously, but I do feel like we've all got that kind of love for exploring new sounds, and joining different genres into what we've been doing before, and kind of the excitement of discovering something new, and keeping the playing music, the playful side of it. I think we've been pretty good at holding on to that, and if we didn't have that, I think it maybe some other bands it can get a bit stale feeling, and it's like you're just rehashing the same stuff, and maybe that also people's enthusiasm within a project can wane. But we've been really lucky in that sense, I think.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because also one thing I did actually want to ask as well, in terms of sort of, I guess, success and how far the band has spread, is obviously the Australian connection. Because I think I should say, do you feel like the band would have done so well in a country like Australia if you weren't called the Wombats?
Probably not.
No, I think it's something that there is some truth in there for sure. But at the same time, if the music was, like didn't resonate with people in Australia, then it wouldn't have helped regardless. So
Of course.
so obviously it was maybe they are a sneaky way in to
Always,
to kind of
always
like
thinking, always thinking.
get you all listening, and
Yeah.
then once actually they sound all right. Like it sounds like this, like maybe folk band or something different, but
Mm.
or like something that is a joke or whatever. But I think eventually, like obviously the songs is kind of like created that, I suppose.
Well, it's funny because, like, if you in the UK, we did a gig early doors, like probably 2005 or something in London, and afterwards, this journalist came up and was like, "Oh, my editor wanted me to come down because," and he said when he said the name, he was, he said, "Is this a joke?" and almost didn't come to the gig, but then he was like, "I'm so glad I did because I had a great time and loved it, and I'll be following you guys from now on." But I think in the UK, maybe that was the feeling. Whereas, I can imagine someone working at Triple J or whatever who gets thousands of CDs across the desk every day. All of a sudden, the Wombats from Liverpool. What's this? I suppose there's that kind of extra, as Tord said, little foot in the door to begin with. Maybe that gave us a tiny little advantage in Australia. But we have to believe that it's about the music first and
Oh, I
foremost.
mean, I'm absolutely sure it is. I mean, that's exactly what drew me to you guys when I first started hearing you. But actually, I guess also, one quick question, and I guess this is a little bit of a pop quiz for you guys. How many times have you visited Australia now?
Maybe
15 times,
15.
maybe.
Is
I'd
it
say it's like
15?
around 15, I would say.
Okay, well, I was hoping that you'd either be like higher or lower, because from what I can tell, it is 15. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I was doing some looking because I was thinking it feels like you guys are always here. You know what I mean? But I should also say, as a very embarrassing admission, you guys have played Australia almost 100 times, from what I can tell, and I have never seen you guys perform. I feel like I'm the
Oh,
only
no way.
person in Australia who can actually say that. You almost every time you guys have been here, I've either been in a different state at the time, I've missed it, or things have been happening. And yeah, it almost feels like it's some sort of rite of passage. Sorry, that every as music fan in Australia, it's sort of it's sort of the second you turn 18, here's your first legal drink, here's your ticket to a Wombats gig. You know what I mean? It's how it feels.
Well, next time.
Oh, I'm sure it'll happen. But I mean, obviously, it is all well and good to chat about the Wombats. But in recent years, the pair of you have been performing as Sunship Balloon and making music. Now, you did sort of touch on it at the start, there, Dan. But I guess the way it sort of came about. You were saying you had all this sort of music banking up on the hard drive. So how did it sort of come from saying we've got all this music, let's actually the pair of us get together and turn it into actual tangible music?
Todd?
Yeah, no, I think like there was so many like because obviously like we work with trying to make something every single day. Like I go to the studio every day. The same with Dan. Like we all always trying to create. And at this moment of like in the very early days, obviously I live in Norway now, but I was living in Liverpool, and me and Dan were kind of like, okay, let's try and make some music, like try and make some tracks maybe for the Wombats. That was, I guess, that was the aim in the very beginning. That's kind of how it all started. Or like just create something, like it could be whatever. And like some tracks maybe turned into like Wombat songs, but there was a bunch of other songs that were like, you know, didn't have like didn't make it to the Wombats, or we didn't start working on them or whatever, but we were still like, these songs have potential, and it would be a shame if they just ended up like staying on the hard drive. And so I guess that's kind of how it started, like going through all this like kind of tracks and ideas that we kind of been initially doing for the Wombats, and that's how we kind of did our first EP. And as Dan was saying, like once that kind of like like we started to do a bit more uh, new songs, then it was like, okay, we have this project now. We can actually like with that in mind, and then eventually make songs that sound like Sunship Balloon or like fit into the project. But yeah, initially it started as kind of like Wombats kind of like initial ideas, I guess.
Right,
Yeah.
because also one thing I was actually wondering about as well, especially when Dan and I first spoke, was that obviously it's 2/3 of the Wombats obviously coming together. So theoretically, one would assume it would probably sound like 2/3 of the Wombats. Sorry. So how do you sort of go about avoiding that? Because I mean, I know when it comes to the Wombats, Murph writes a lot of the lyrics for the band, so you haven't sort of got that aspect of it. So in that way, it already sounds different. But I guess how do you sort of go into a project like this and create something that hopefully doesn't sound tangential to the Wombats, but sounds like a different project altogether?
I think, well, to begin with, because anything we were making that felt more Wombats ended up going into the Wombats probably. So this was stuff that was, because obviously you want to try, we love like electronica and like weird or alternative music and stuff that sometimes like starting points for songs that we would think maybe to begin with could be in the Wombats world ended up feeling like, oh, it's something different. Or if I had like too many lyrical ideas for it, then it kind of felt like I was like, oh no, but I really like where this is going now. And obviously if it's going to go into Wombats, then um, Murph does most of the lyrics, and therefore it doesn't feel like it fits anymore. It can't. So then it gets parked. So I think like especially once the first EP was kind of done, then it was very much like I don't know. It's really hard to describe because people have asked this before, like friends and stuff. How do you know which project something is heading for? But I think Sunship, it does have its kind of like there's a feeling and a part or like lyrically that I feel like I'm going towards, and musically, like loads of the influences that Tord has like come into it that are. There's been a few Wombat songs where maybe that's like Method to the Madness, and there's like chopped audio, like electronica stuff that's got into it, but there was a
Or
lot more with
Greek
Sunship
tragedy, for
or
example.
Greek tragedy. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's other like we can't, of course, that like the Wombats I do feel is very very broad in terms of like the genres and the musical elements that are in there, and we do experiment a lot with it, but it's like it's just a slightly different world. And I guess the main thing is just that, as you say, like I'm singing and doing the lyrics really, so it's in that sense it's just a different brain processing a lot of the message of the songs and stuff. And Murph's such a distinctive like lyricist that I guess we couldn't help but feel different with Sunship Balloon.
Yeah, right. Because it almost to me, like at least just with the way you're sort of explaining it there, it almost seems like one of those things where it's sort of like you make music and it's sort of you'll know it when you see it, as a like that sort of tells you which basket it falls into. If it's the Wombats or
Yeah,
Sunship or anything.
that's so true. There's only been like a couple of song ideas or starting points that maybe very quickly I feel like, oh, this could actually be either this or this. You know, now anyway, I feel, especially having done 2 albums with Sunship, it feels very much like kind of just know when something's more Sunship or more my solo stuff or more Wombats. And I'm sure it's the same for Tord. It's like,
It's hard to juggle sometimes, of course, but then obviously you can once like you come up with the initial idea of a song, then obviously you can choose which way you want to take it as well a little bit.
mm,
So sometimes it can be a bit of a, oh, should we take it into Sunship, or should we try and make a Wombat song out of it, or it's sometimes you have that choice, I guess, earlier in the process.
Well, also like so does a lot of ambient electronica stuff, and there was times, especially like during the lockdowns, where I was just like, can just send me over a load of stuff that you've got that maybe you're not sure exactly what to do with it, but just see if it inspires anything. And he'd send like 20 ideas over, and I'd listen through them all and make voice notes on some, because sometimes you just hear a melody or a line, something just like popped into my head, and for any of those songs that happened with, I'd go back to it and then see if there was any more, and then the spider web would just start, and then before I knew it, like a song would be done with this like backing track that Tord had sent, and I feel like that was really nice for me as well, because I don't really make stuff like that Todd does, and so when I'd have it, it was so like new and whoa, what what's going on here, that I could hear loads of different melodies and stuff that maybe because Todd had been so in the nuts and bolts of like making all the music, maybe couldn't quite see or hear anything anymore, because you know he's made all this stuff that like it just sounds the way it does, whereas I don't know any of that stuff. So for me, it's just like I could just start hearing, imagining melodies. So it was a really good partnership where we made loads of songs like that, basically um, that wouldn't have been, neither one of us could have made by ourselves.
So it's often the case that actually, because I go so deep down like a rabbit hole on like production or like how to make things sound, or like I can sit and tweak on it for like weeks, like if I want to. But then, as you say, like the whole thing about like making top lines or finding a suitable lyric or whatever, that's often something I struggle with. So that's why it's working so well as well.
Mm.
Like, and that's often how a lot of the songs are made as well. Not always, like sometimes we could even start something together, or like that Dan will
Mm.
come in with a ready-made song, and I'll kind of like try and mess it up a little bit with some production bits or whatever.
Because Dan, like
Yeah.
you obviously mentioned before, sort of like the idea of like lockdown and sort of Todd coming to you with ideas in lockdown. Because that was actually, I mean, that was when you and I first spoke. When I interviewed you for Rolling Stone, it was in the midst of lockdown, and there wasn't exactly much positivity going on outside. But thankfully, there was new music, and you had stuff like Sunship Balloon coming out. But I guess when that album had come out, had you expected it to be an ongoing thing at all? Because I know at the time you'd mentioned there'd even almost been a second album written around that time, because it was such a therapeutic experience for you. But I guess, had you sort of expected, once the world opened up, the Wombats were able to sort of, make more music and tour again, did you actually think there would sort of be another album, or was it sort of the thing where you thought, well, this might go on the back burner once, once the world comes back to a sense of normality?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose in a way it did go on the back burner for a year, because we were touring with the Wombats so much on the last album. And but what's lovely with having a project like that is that there is there's no rush to do anything. We're doing it all off our own back. We don't have a label waiting for an album. It's just like kind of, we can chuck stuff at it and time at it and energy whenever we feel like. And so it was really nice, because I think when I spoke to you, we were supposed we were gonna we had a tour booked in the March April of when lockdown began, and then that couldn't happen, so we suddenly found ourselves with a few weeks, obviously, well, which turned out to be many months. And but like at first we were like, oh, we were supposed to be on tour now. We'd already kind of dedicated that time to doing a Sunship Balloon tour for 3 weeks, but so we were just like, right, let's just make the second album, like let's make more music. So we just started making loads and loads of songs, and then obviously that just carried on into the summer, and I'd say by the end of the summer we probably had at least 50% of what ended up being the second album already kind of made, and it was just therapy, like more and more, when you listen to songs sometimes, like after you've made them, and you don't really know it, you didn't know at the time exactly what it was about, because it was just coming out. I think more and more it is that kind of therapy and mental health side of things, to try and like figure out what's going on and try and express those feelings. And frustrations and difficulties and whatever. So for me, like, yeah, Sunship's become just a great place for me to get my therapy, and it's cheaper than seeing a therapist as well.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly can't complain in that case, can you? So, you know, if you're making your own therapy.
Are you sure it's cheaper?
Well, actually, not sure. Been a few trips to Norway. That's more of our wine bill, though.
Yeah, food and wine bills.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it sounds like everyone's happy. That's the main thing. Obviously, you were mentioning making a new album, and I feel like I should touch on that one because it's called Real Humans, and it came out back in January. So, I guess what does this album represent for who Sunship Balloon are in 2024? If that doesn't sound too much like a wanky journalist question, which I do have plenty of.
keep them coming. Who Sunship Balloon are? Todd, do you want to have a go? Like, musically, is there any?
Sorry, I kind of lost it a little bit.
You were just thinking about food and wine, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, I feel like the second album, like it's so hard, you know, like it's really hard, those kind of questions, because it's so,
that's what I'm here
so
for.
much that, yeah.
I'm
There's
here
so
to
much
ask the
that goes
hard-hitting
in.
questions.
There's so much that goes on into making an album. Like, initially we actually had a load of songs that were, a lot of them were electronica-y based stuff, as we talked about before, that were from ambient electronica kind of world, but then turned them into songs. And we realized quite quickly in the process that we probably had actually two albums taking shape, that there was more electronica stuff and then more of the band stuff that ended up making up,
It's we even could have had three albums. I think we could have the rock album, and
yeah,
then more the alternative kind of like dream pop album, and then we could
yeah,
have had the electro album. We could have done it that way as
yeah,
well,
probably,
because we had a lot more like there was a well more like you know, we had loads of ideas that had more riffy kind of like rocky sounding songs that didn't make
yeah.
it. Like we still got like a hard drives full of songs.
Yeah,
Even when you think you got this outlet where you can just release everything, it's like no, you just like, oh,
They just
that
keep
doesn't really
adding
fit
up, don't
in. That
they?
doesn't really.
yeah, you just
Yeah,
keep making more stuff, but
there will eventually be like, you know, songs that just will stay on the hard drive. That's always the case.
yeah, you've got to accept it and move on. But yeah, so there's a third album of more electronica stuff that will hopefully come out, you know, next year or whenever we get to finish it. But this one, so it's tough. Like, I don't really know exactly what it is, but I think it's the same with the
I
one
feel
that
like it's
whenever
easy. Isn't it? What would you say then, from like a journalistic point of view? Like, when you hear it, like, because it's maybe easy for you to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, because I was
Just fire it right back at you.
yeah, that's fine. You know, I mean, honestly, listening to the album, I think the best thing I can say is it sounds like, you know, an evolution of, you know, and that is such a wanky journalist thing to say, but you listen to the first album and it feels like, you know, it feels like the first album of a band who was sort of like who've got that sound, and then the second album they feel more comfortable, and that's sort of what it feels like with you guys. It definitely feels like an album where you've been able to say, you know what, we've got our sound, and now we're going to stretch our legs a little bit, and it feels a little bit more confident, and it feels a little bit like it's an evolution. And now I feel like I'm rambling just to make sure I'm sort of, you know, saying the right things. But honestly, it was a great album to listen to.
Oh, cheers! I think
Thank you.
that's a fair that feels, actually, you saying that, it's like, oh no, I do see that kind of felt like, okay, we know what this project is now, and like, we, you know, off we go, kind of like, actually, I mean, we did that with the first album as well, but like, it did feel like a kind of like, yeah, cool, we know a bit more what we're doing here and how we want it to be. And I guess maybe the fact, yeah, that we start to finish again was kind of, you know, we were in the driving seat, managed, you know, we made something that was like exactly how we were hearing it being. But I was going to say, like, even with the Wombats, the amount of times we've had those questions of like, So, you know, how would you describe the Wombats, or like even from like people you meet just in life, you know, oh, I don't know the Wombats. What kind of music is it? Honestly, like the amount of times, even after all this time, you would think that you've got like a stock, easy kind of ready-made, almost like, oh yeah, I know what we are. But I still find myself going like, yeah, well, it's kind of a bit, you know, indie alternative, but there's a bit of pop
And
and a bit of electro, and
the
you know,
problem is, I think the
like,
problem is that when you work creatively with music, you draw, you cherry pick like so many elements from very different things. You know, it could be like cherry picking like one thing from something really heavy and one thing from something electronic, or from that like 90s sounding thing, but then it could be like a 80s sounding thing that you cherry pick for this sound. Or you can, that lyric is, you know, you cherry pick something from either your life or something in a film that you saw or whatever, you know, like it's constantly kind of like, yeah, such a mashup of references and ideas, and it is not one particular thing. And often, like, we would think that we kind of like, oh yeah, this is very different, this new Wombat song, or and it's so different to what we've done before. And then, as you said, Dan, like, you know, it was Method to the Madness, I think, and then someone said, oh, that sounds like the first album or something, and we're like, what? You know, like it's, I don't
yeah,
know. We maybe see it quite slightly different,
I mean, pretty
I
much
guess,
all music is a
for that
sum of
reason.
its parts and a sum of what inspires it. I mean, even Dan, as you were saying, like you can't even describe your band. I mean, I also play in a band, not to the level of the Wombats by any means, but I mean, it's the sort of thing where like you're so involved and you're so in the weeds that you're just making what sounds good to you. You're taking your own influences. That when you realize you have to actually contextualize it for someone on the outside, you just like, I'm
yeah.
going to need 3 to 5 business days to actually write an answer for this one. It's a difficult thing to
Yeah,
do.
yeah, and then actually, because you end up, you know, you've got all these memories and attachments to the songs that no one else has any idea is there, and all these feelings and whatever, and like all the music, as Todd said, it's just such a mash of everything that to actually put a finger on it, it's kind of like, I guess maybe this album is a bit more in the like dream pop kind of world, maybe than the first album was. Maybe slightly more like had a bit
Psychedelic.
more psychedelic stuff in there, I guess maybe like the approach
But
to
that's still, the psychedelia is still kind of underlying. I think even in the popular numbers, I think in terms of
yeah
production choices and,
mm,
you know, like the layers and the guitar sounds, or, you know, it's quite like still have it, has that element. So
yeah
yeah,
and a little the last song on the album actually, Feeling Lazy, was a kind of link track to the next album, which is the more electronica one. So Feeling Lazy probably could have or should have been on the next one, but we wanted to have like a little, you know, liaison to
gateway.
the gateway to the next one. um, just in case you were thinking, why that's a bit of an odd one out.
You're giving it all away now, Dan. This is
I
like
know.
everybody knows that now. Like
It was dropping the breadcrumbs. I mean, like you're mentioning Radiohead before. I mean, that isn't that what sort of Radiohead did with that the OK Computer and In Rainbows? It's sort of like if you sort of play them, like mesh them together, it almost sounds like they were working on In Rainbows 10 years earlier or something like that. And it's,
Oh wow.
so there you go. I mean, you're saying before you don't want to compare yourself to Radiohead, but here's the perfect chance. Here's the opportunity. And I guess as we speak, it's about 5 months since the Wombats were here in Australia. So I'm sure you're both having withdrawals, given it must be the longest time between performances.
yeah,
But
it's usually we have a yearly trip, so I don't think we'll make it this year though.
I mean that's just the way it has to go, I guess. But I mean, do you think that Sunship Balloon might ever make it down to Australia?
Hopefully one day that'd be awesome. But this year we're just concentrating on the. We've just been doing some writing for the sixth Wombats album. We were over in LA, got back last week. So I think we're definitely moving into let's focus on the next album. And given how much we tour with the Wombats as well, I think, and the fact that me and Tord live in different countries, it's kind of. I think if we lived in the same city, it would be a lot easier to be like, oh, let's just get Sunship Balloon rehearsed to a point that we can, if a gig comes up, do one, and then we could do one on a Friday night in Liverpool, But because we live in different cities, and we'd have to get a band together and find a place to rehearse, and we don't have that set up. So for the time being, it's kind of I guess we've just accepted that it's a
Logistical nightmare.
studio project. Yeah. But it would be lovely to do at one, some point in down the years.
Yeah. Well, I am undoubtedly stoked that you guys are still making music in this capacity of Sunship Balloon, even though the Wombats are now making a 6th album. So I'm definitely keen to see what this 3rd Sunship Balloon album sounds like. So yeah, very, very keen.
Oh, wait.
Well, I guess we should, we've been talking for quite a while now, but I feel like we should sort of like cap things off by getting down to the portion of the podcast from which its namesake is derived. So just as a little bit of an explainer for those who haven't heard this podcast before, since it is the first episode, again, thank you for christening this one in the best way possible. So, Trusty Chords is built around the average chord. So, folks who know theory would know the standard chord. It's built around the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes of a scale. So, we're going to extrapolate that a little bit and talk about one artist that has impacted you, 3 albums that have influenced you, and 5 songs you can turn to. So, let's also be fair, there's a chance this idea might be abandoned very soon in this podcast. But it's early days. I'm feeling young and ambitious. So I guess to kick things off, a first question is, who is the one artist that has inspired you the most? If you want to go first, Dan.
Yeah, the one artist that that sort of changed my life, I guess, would have to be Nirvana. And when I first heard Smells Like Teen Spirit, in particular, that song, it set me on a path to want to play the drums in a band. That there was, I remember the moment when I was in the front room watching MTV, and just that kind of like kick-started something that kind of never went away. So I'm very grateful for Dave Grohl, and yeah, it was every time I listened to that album. And actually, if I had to pick, for one of the 3 albums that you were talking about, I probably wouldn't actually go for Nevermind. I'd go for Colour and the Shape, the second Foo Fighters album. I used to play along. I mean, I played along to Nevermind all the time as well, but that album I used to just like play along to the drums, and it's the album that I still, when I sit down on the drum kit, I often look like I love. I guess because it takes me back to being 14, 15 again, but playing along to the songs and like know which fills are coming where and like all that stuff. So yeah, that album and drummer was massively, massively important to me.
Yeah, right. Because actually, it is also funny you say that, because I remember growing up as well, listening to Smells Like Teen Spirit, and that was actually one thing I used to listen to the most, is the drums in that song. Just specifically, like, there was something just so forceful. I remember people saying, "Oh, you're a guitarist. Surely you're listening to the guitar." And I'm like, no. Kurt Cobain can, take a seat in the corner. I'm listening to how powerful Dave Grohl is sounding here. And it's such a primal thing, but it's the sort of thing where you really sort of lock into it and you start realizing he was really... There's a reason he's considered one of the greatest musicians.
Oh yeah, massively. Because I was the same as you. I was playing flute, piano, acoustic guitar, and stuff, and I loved all that side of it. But exactly that song, for whatever reason, it was just so visceral, so instinctive, and like it just felt so amazing that you get that kind of like, I want to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
Or I wonder if I could ever do that. Probably can't, but it's like it's a special moment, and I'm glad it exists.
Yeah, and then so obviously we seem to have lost Tord at the moment. So I'm not too sure if he's able to join while we're recording, and I'm not too sure what it is there. But with that in mind, I guess I'll ask the next question to you, which is the 3 albums. You obviously mentioned the Foo Fighters album there. So would that be one of the ones that you'd pick?
Yeah, that would be one of the 3 for sure. Yeah. It was it's a start to finish kind of album I can listen to, and I've still got a CD player, and my little boy, he's just started learning how to like turn it on and press play and stuff, and that Colour and the Shape album was on the side and had it on, and so I've listened to it so many more times now in the playroom, and he loves putting it on, and he goes bang 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 bang. So like seeing him jump, love that music as well. It's a really nice full circle.
Right. So, and I guess what other albums would make up that nice little triumvirate, if I can use a fancy word?
Yeah, the other two albums, I guess I'd go for. I'll do it in order of kind of ones that really struck me, and inevitably, I suppose it's in your teenage years. The ones that I mean, there's countless albums during my life that have really meant a lot to me, and I still go back to. But kind of, I'll stick to my teenage years, I think. So yeah, Color and the Shape, and then the next one that really blew my mind was OK Computer by Radiohead. I think I was 14. I think it came out in 98, didn't it?
97, actually.
97. Okay, yeah. So 13, 14. And I remember walking down the road with a CD Walkman, and my friend had just got the album and I didn't have it. And I actually didn't even really know Radiohead at the time. Like I hadn't listened to the Bends or Pablo Honey. And so this was my first, down, like the start of Airbag was the first introduction to Radiohead, and from the word go, I was just like, "What is this?" And I bought the album and listened to it like over and over and over and over again, and again, it just became one of those albums that. I mean, they have quite a few perfect albums, to be fair,
Yeah, they do.
that you can,
Very good
that you
strike
can
rate.
listen, yeah, from start to finish. That you just go, there's not a single song in there that shouldn't be on this album, kind of thing. And but yeah, it was that one was just such an inspiring song. That kind of I guess because I listened to a lot of like same as Tord, like Green Day and Blink 182 and a lot of that kind of like trashy, punky, three-piece, like punk poppy kind of stuff, which felt like a bit more. Oh, I can learn these three chords or four chords, and I can like play along. And there's a sense which I love about punk that you can, it puts the music within the grasp of any young musician or anyone who feels like they could maybe do this themselves,
Yeah.
which is lovely to have an art form that you feel that you can partake in yourself. So I love that side of it, but Radiohead are definitely not quite like that. They're more one of those bands that makes you go like, whoa, I need to learn so much about like chords and melody and, also this is like a foreign language. This is completely like, it's so magical and spellbinding. It's like not quite jazz, but it's that kind of like, what are they doing here and how is this happening?
Even if you look at the liner notes and you're reading some of the instruments that Johnny Greenwood's playing, you're just thinking, what the hell are these things?
Yeah,
Instruments you've never heard
exactly.
of.
Yeah, remember hearing like going, "What's a dulcimer?" And like it's amazing, and like all the synths they use, and but yeah, so that set me off on again, just wanting to learn more and more about that whole world, and obviously Kid A, then even more kind of like, what are these synths, and like, wow, what's this? It kind of introduced me to that electronica world more, but that won't be my third one. After that, I think so. The next like step for me, like I always loved folk music from like growing up listening to Irish folk that my mum had on, and lots of like singer songwriter stuff. And Neil Young was my dad's favorite artist, so we always listened to him. But I think no, maybe I should go for a Neil Young one. I was gonna do Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan because that was the first like Bob Dylan album that I really like got into. That again just blew my mind from a songwriting point of view. But I think I'll actually go for After the Gold Rush by Neil Young because it was again one of the ones my dad used to play all the time, and I feel like that was just a kind of constant soundtrack through my life and gave me a lot like acoustic kind of slightly surreal lyrics, and Neil Young's like amazing at painting pictures with his words, and I always feel like when I listen to his stuff and like especially on that album, it just conjures up so many images whilst I'm listening to it that I absolutely love that side of it, and you don't even need a music video, you don't need anything because the music and the lyrics like do it for you. And I think that's that's been a huge influence on me from a lyrical and songwriting point of view. That I couldn't think of a better example probably for that than After the Gold Rush.
Yeah. Those are some amazing choices. And I guess, as a very controversial opinion, I've always felt that actually The Bends is a better album than OK Computer. But that's the sort of thing that can start a fight in the correct bar. You know what I mean? if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time and you say the wrong Radiohead opinion, you have some very very angry Oxford scholars getting angry at you. But
I think that's a very valid opinion, I think. And I think the good thing and the easy get out with Radiohead is that they're all so different that you can happily, it's not as though you could confuse the Bends and OK Computer or Kid A and In Rainbows. Like they're so different and such like unique bodies of work that it doesn't really matter in a way like which of their albums end up becoming your favorite, because it's like it's all one kind of amazing body of work that yeah.
And I guess lastly, I'd love to know the 5 songs you can always turn to, whether it be comfort, excitement, anything at all, your 5 trusty songs. Which Radiohead songs are you picking for this one?
Well, I feel like I shouldn't pick any songs from the albums I've done, because I've already covered all the songs on those albums, because that kind of goes without saying. But so I'll just do ones at the moment that like I can, that end up going on quite a lot, that make me feel comforted or energy or whatever. So Strange Overtones by David Byrne. I'm not sure if you know that one.
I don't know the song, but I'm well across David Byrne. Yeah,
so that song, check it out. Kind of jealous that you haven't heard it. It's so good. My cousin introduced me to it like about 3 or 4 years ago, and I haven't looked. It's just one of those songs that I could just put on time and time again. It's such a cool song, and it's brilliant. So that one, and then I will go to a song that was in my teenage years, Smashing Pumpkins and the song 1979. Could have picked many of their songs, and to be honest, Melancholy or Machina like could have been one of my favorite albums. Like Jimmy Chamberlain's drumming in general is just mind blowing, and like he was one of my favorite drummers. Like his attention to detail on the kit and stuff. But 1979 is just such a great, like, put that on if you're in the car or on a train or traveling in general. It's just got such a great groove, hasn't it, the whole way through. And it's kind of like melancholy, uplifting at the same time, and really eccentric poetry as well.
There's such a strange sort of vibe that you get from that song that you can't capture anywhere else. It's just this strange sort of, it's almost like, Billy Corgan knew what he wanted to sort of portray with that song, and no one else has ever come close to it. It's untouchable, just about.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. So good. So that, then I would go for a more like chilled, probably Holocene, Bon Iver. That song's like a very rainy day kind of like look out the window with a coffee kind of song that just calms me, which is really nice. More songs. I might go for Motion Sickness by Phoebe Bridgers. Absolutely love that song. I've been really enjoying Boy Genius's new album.
Boy Genii, however it's plural.
Boy Genius. Yeah, they got some great stuff on their album as well. But go for Motion Sickness. Really love Phoebe Bridgers. Like I think she's a really unique talent, and there's not many new sort of singer-songwriters that have like just cut through and jumped out to me. And I can see why she's become so huge.
I mean, she just has this amazing sort of way of writing a song as well. I mean, I can't remember the song now. I think it's Garden Song from a few years ago.
Yeah,
you listen to that one, and you just sort of like, it's the sort of thing song you feel like I could write that. But then you try doing it, and you're just like, I can't write that. No one can write it. Phoebe Bridgers can write it. That's all.
It's that unique like voice, and there'll be a couple of lines within every one of her songs that you just like. No one else is coming up with any of that. Like,
she's an amazing songwriter.
Yeah, she's absolutely brilliant. And then seen as I think that's 4.
That's 4, yeah.
Is it? Yeah. So my final one, given that our like the album Real Humans is in the dream pop world, in my head at least, I'll go for a dream pop band song. I think they're dream pop. They feel like they are to me anyway. Always, the Canadian band, and I go for Not My Baby,
right,
or Dreams Tonight. Don't know, whichever. Yeah, Not My Baby. Let's go for that.
Yeah, right.
And again, I think they're such a great band, such a unique sound, and like, as from a songwriting point of view, like melodically and everything, the songs feel like they kind of always existed. That feeling when you hear songs that you're like, this doesn't sound like it wasn't thought about and written, when of course I know it was.
Yeah.
But those songs, like, if you do music yourself, the best songs often are the ones that you don't overthink. They just kind of, it's almost like they were there and you're just the conduit for the song to just come out. And I love those ones. And you kind of wait around thinking like, when's the next one of those going to come along? Because we've had a couple of bang your head against the walls, and then all of a sudden it comes. And I feel like Always have got a lot of those songs where it's like, it's just perfect. It's just the way it was supposed to be. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I absolutely love Always. But as a music journalist, they always piss me off so much, because I always go to pronounce them as all of these, like any normal person would. Or the same with a band like Churches. You want to say Churches or stuff like that. It's frustrating, but the aesthetic is key. That's what makes them reigning kings of the dream pop world. Amazing. Well, Dan Haggis, I just want to say thank you so very much for being generous with your time and for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast. Ideally, I'd also be thanking Tord right now as well, but technically have meant that he's not here for the final part. But yes, thank you so much for being part of the inaugural episode of this podcast, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, and good luck with your podcast. It's a great idea, and teaches people a little bit of music theory at the same time. So what's not to love?
That's exactly the plan. Every day is a school day, and if I can become that teacher for a few minutes of the day, then I'm doing something right. Thank you for listening in to the first episode of Trusty Chords. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be great if you're able to like, follow, or share on the social media platform of your choice, and leave a review on your preferred podcasting service. I recently started listening to some episodes of a podcast from 2010, and it's amazing to see how beholden to only Facebook they are. But we're here in April 2024, so we've got lots of options, and you can find both myself and Trusty Chords on the regular channels with the username Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. Except for over on Twitter, where it's Trusty Chords Pod. Thanks, Twitter. We've also got a Spotify playlist where you'll be able to find the 5 songs picked as part of the Trusty Chords segment. Just search out Trusty Chords on Spotify, wade through the wonderful versions of the Hot Water music song, and you'll find it. I'd like to thank Dan and Tord from Sunship Balloon for their time, and the rest of the team that make up Trusty Chords for their assistance in putting this first episode together. I'll be honest, I run a ship staffed with a skeleton crew, so that team is actually just me, but I feel like I should say that anyway. But if you enjoyed this episode, you'll be able to hear more of Trusty Chords in the coming weeks, and I hope to see you again as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.